Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, 9 Key Ps of Digital Citizenship. We know how busy you are at the end of the school year, so we're especially appreciative that you're taking the time to be with us today. Today's webinar is sponsored by NetRef, which is a powerful internet management tool that helps keep students on task and helps educators determine the true ROI of EdTech investments. Before we begin the program, I'll review just a few quick housekeeping items. We will be accepting questions throughout the webinar, and we'll hold a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. You can go ahead and send your questions in to me as they come up for you using the questions feature in your control panel. Just type your question into the top box, push send, and I'll receive that question and put it into the queue to be answered during the Q&A at the end. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use that same questions feature to get my attention, and I'll do my best to resolve the problem for you. We are recording today's webinar, and we will be providing you with a link to that as well as the presentation slides. So keep an eye on your email inbox for information on how to access those materials tomorrow. Our speaker, Vicki Davis, is going to go through a lot of information really quickly, and she's also going to provide you with lots of resources. In the email you'll receive tomorrow, we'll provide you with access to all of that information. So don't worry too much about having to scribble down links or taking notes, because you'll get it all tomorrow. Now let's get started. I'm pleased to welcome today's speaker, who is Vicki Davis. Vicki is a full-time teacher and IT director at Westwood Schools in Camilla, Georgia, but many of you are much more familiar with her very popular Cool Cat Teacher blog and 10-Minute Teacher podcast, where she inspires teachers and provides practical instructional and classroom management tips. Vicki is also well known for her creation of more than 20 global collaborative projects, including the Flat Classroom project that won ISTE's Online Learning Award in 2006 and the Mad About Mattering project in 2016 and 2017. She's also the author of 3 books, including the groundbreaking Flattening Classrooms, Engaging Minds, as well as many articles for publications like Edutopia, The Washington Post, and The Atlantic. Vicki is an internationally known speaker on the innovative use of educational technology in the classroom and is both a Discovery Star educator and a Google certified innovator. She's the proud mother of 3 children, 4 dogs, and 3 cats, and honored to have the privilege of teaching more than 100 amazing students. And we are honored to have Vicki with us today, and again, are appreciative of her taking time out of her busy end-of-year schedule to be with us and share this great framework for promoting digital citizenship with our students. So I'm going to go ahead and hand the program over to her now.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I know it's crazy times. It's crazy times for me as we get ready to finish up here. But today we're going to talk about the 9 key Ps of digital citizenship. And I would challenge you, you can use it 2 ways. First of all, some of the ideas are going to be a great way to kind of finish up the year with some digital citizenship lessons, and that's perfectly okay. But I'm also going to give you sort of a framework I use for incorporating it into my class throughout the year. So you can also jot down ideas if you do like I do and you plan in the summertime. It'll kind of help you plan, how you're going to do that. So let's talk about our learning outcomes. So we are going to kind of touch on the 9 key Ps of digital citizenship, but I'm going to show you, how I teach that to students. I'm also going to talk a little bit about how I think I'm going to be upgrading some of those key Ps of digital citizenship this summer with a few more questions. I'm going to talk about how do I introduce the concepts with the students, and it's really important for them to be the leaders, because if you just talk to them about it, they don't internalize it. So they have to act, they have to be part of the learning process, and when they are the leaders, then they truly do internalize and change how they approach life and online citizenship. I'm going to talk about ongoing bell ringers and reinforcements that you can do throughout the year that really help the kids remember it. And I'll talk about a fun game that helps students become more savvy about fabricated news. And it's such a fun game that really it's one of those you can pull out of the hat just about any time you want to. And it's a fantastic lesson. And the nice thing is that it's, I hate to say it's really no prep, but it really is no prep, because the kids, once you've introduced it and you've done it once, you can really do it any time during the year that you need to do that. So digital citizenship, Ribble and Bailey define it as the norms of behavior with regard to technical technology use. Now, a lot of people say, oh, it's just citizenship, and perhaps there is some piece of that, but I do think that we have to talk about, using the smartphones, using the computers, using the technology, and how we use it to be good citizens in our world and to have a successful life. So the strongest internet filter in the world is the software between our ears. It's the human brain. And this is what we have to enable, because there is no filter on this planet that will get everything out. Keep everything protected. We have to use our brains. Scammers are getting better and better. In fact, I was driving home today and I got a phone call from an 800 number, and it says, "We've received your Visa inquiry. Have your Visa card ready and press 2 when you're ready." And it was obviously a scam, but I can't tell you, I know how many people are going to be falling for it. And it sounded like one of the call, the same voice that you get when you call your Visa company. So it's really kind of scary. We've got to educate the software. I've read statistics as high as 1 in 7 people will have their identity stolen in their lifetime. Well, we don't want it to be our students, and we don't want it to be us or other teachers. And some teachers are gullible, so we want to educate that software. Now, there's so many things out there. There's identity theft, cyber stalking, viruses, malware, spyware, phishing, farming. And then there are intellectual property thieves who take the content that people create. And we need to understand all of these different threats that are out there. But the strongest enemy of cyber criminals, I believe that teachers who arm their students with knowledge of common electronic crime issues of the day and teach them the steps to take if suspicious activity is noticed or offenses occur. That's the strongest enemy of cyber criminals. It's you and it's me, as we educate people on how to understand digital citizenship. And this is not a once and done kind of thing, because the cyber criminals, I've read that some organized crime can spend as much as 1/3 of their money on cybercrime. And we know that they're hubs of cybercrime. And our whole society is reeling from all of the cybercrime influence that's out there. So we've just got to really educate ourselves and educate our students about things that are out there. So this is an example of some citizenship that's from some time ago. And this is an example of students actually conversing on a wiki, talking about, having a wiki war, and somebody deleted somebody else's content and that sort of thing. And I do want to point out that while I'm teaching about this today, that the best way to really teach citizenship is after you've taught these concepts, if you can have global collaborative projects or even collaborative projects within your classroom so that you can have opportunities. In math, you solve problems. Well, why do we treat digital citizenship problems like they're bad things? Digital citizenship problems are teaching opportunities. They're the things that the kids will never forget when you teach them how to be safe and what to do. So I do want to point that out, that after you do this, collaborating, connecting globally is a very important thing to do. I also want to mention that the 9 key P's for proactive knowledge, I've mentioned it and written about it on Edutopia. This is a thing that they have published. I also first wrote about this in my book, Reinventing Writing, in chapter 13, where I talk about how to be a safe digital citizen. And I talk about these 9 key P's. So the first example I'm going to give you, and also want to mention what Emily had mentioned earlier, that we do have a link where all of these resources are going, and you'll be able to get a link to all of these hyperdocs, and you can just take them and have them free. Just have them, use them, copy them, use them in your classroom. You can have all of these hyperdocs, and I have hyperdocs for all of the 9 key P's, so you can have all of them and use those and have them, and those lesson plans are just right there for you. So the first thing I like to do is give them a sample topic, and I do like to use hyperdocs for that, and I'm going to talk about what that is in a minute. Let me show you an example. So the first P is passwords, and a hyperdoc is a Google Doc that has an innovative lesson. Now, these are shared typically as a read-only document, and then students make a copy. They fill them out and they turn them back in to Google Classroom. So think of it as almost like a handout and I don't really like the word handout, but you're giving them a paperless electronic resource they're making a copy of, and then they are typing and putting information in it and handing it back as they do the activity. It needs to be an innovative and not just a fill in the blank, and that's what you're trying to be. I also want to give credit to Heather Marshall, who came up with this format for the Hero's Journey Hyperdoc format. And for this particular lesson, I used the Hero's Journey Hyperdoc. Now, if you want to know more about the Hero's Journey, you definitely want to look it up online and see more about it, because the Hero's Journey is a fantastic Joseph Campbell discovered it in The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and it was the inspiration for Star Wars and George Lucas. And a lot of your best movies have this format. So I do a lot of movie teaching, so I like to use the format so kids can kind of understand this very popular format that has been throughout history in all of our favorite myths and movies and books. So Heather Marshall's the one who created it, and you can just look it up online, or you can also use the hyperdocs that I'll be having. So this particular hyperdoc, you can see the link for this one at the top. First phase, you are saving your friend from being hacked. So your friend is afraid of being hacked and somebody wants to guess their password. Now you're giving the kids 4 options for passwords. Now, I actually give the kids, if I'm doing it on the board, I've got the QR code so they can snap a picture of it and go to that. But I do like them to make the hyperdoc, and I've given them these options. So as they analyze the options in a group or by themselves, I want them to have thoughts on each of these options. And all I want them to do is phase 1 right now. I want them just to guess. I don't want them to look it up. I just want them to guess. And I don't know which ones you're guessing are the best, but very often, something like princess might be picked, or the first one might be picked. And it's a great one to use with teachers too, because they have real problems, a lot of them, with having good passwords. Okay, so phase 2, we're entering a guided challenge. So I'm giving them the worst passwords, and I update this every year, so I'll have the worst passwords of last year. Now you do have to be careful, and I actually have kind of kept the worst passwords of 2015 because the 2016 and 2017 passwords have some really bad profanity in them. So I have to kind of wipe that out or something, and be careful about that. But just realize that these do change. And if you're going to use them, you can, but you have to kind of know that there's some profanity in some of the more modern passwords. So I talk about how the most commonly used passwords circulate through the web, and do you want to change your mind based on some of these? And you'll see one, which is this number 15, which is the one QAZWSX. And that particular one, a lot of people run up and down the keyboard. And that's the one that a lot of people think, oh, that's a great password. But if you look at it and you look at your keyboard, if you're at a computer and you go 1QAZ2WSX, you're running up down the keyboard there with that particular one. So they'll usually take that one out and go, oh, and it will even talk about some of the other aspects of creating a password, but you don't want to do that. So in phase 3, we're going to give them some advice. Now, I know that a lot of you writing teachers are used to the term mentor text, which is a text that people use to model good writing. Now, in this way, you are introducing them to a mentor, but this is in a different way. So this particular article is going to mentor these students on understanding passwords. So I really do consider it mentoring, but we don't want to get confused with mentor text, which is another word that's being used. And I don't know how we're going to differentiate that as we discuss it, because this is an important principle. So you're basically introducing them to a resource that is a good source of information. And so I say, okay, let's read this. What are some things that can make a password unbreakable? And they're going to list those 3 things. And I hope you'll go through this. If this is something you need to do, go through this activity yourself or send it to your teachers and help them understand hyperdocs. And then we're going to check the passwords. So here are 2 links. One is a password checker, and they'll type in the passwords that we gave them, and they'll find that some of those passwords can actually be broken in a very short amount of time, particularly the 4-digit password. And then how big is your haystack will tell you how fast it takes to get to break into password. And then they get to type their question you still have about creating a password, and we'll get back together and we'll talk again at this point. Now, then we have a transformation. So we're trying to transform the knowledge by letting them help others. So we want them to be a digital superhero, keep their friends from being safe, and add text in the text boxes to type recommendations from the superhero so they can be safe. So this is going to open up a little cute little Google drawing, and they will turn around and try to teach others, and we'll share those drawings, and of course, print, put the best ones on the wall, and that kind of thing that we like to do. And then finally, we have mastery. So we're going to come back, discuss our password selection, and have our final recommendations. And in this case, actually, none of these are great. Princess uses, substitutes the dollar signs for the S, which is very common, and Princess is one of the most commons. Football would actually be good unless you play football and love it and your number is 98, and then it probably would be a good one. B is not good because it runs up and down the keyboard, and option A is too short and would be easily hackable. So by the time we get to the bottom, they realize, oh, I need to change my password. Now, at this point, all of my students are going to want to head to their computers and change their password. And of course, we talk about how to remember your password and LastPass and all that sort of thing. Now, I'm not going to be spending as much time on the other key Ps, but I wanted to kind of talk you through the example of how this particular activity worked. Now, I'm obviously guiding them along with a HyperDoc to kind of guide them through this first P here. And I'm also trying to kind of help them understand that things are not always as they appear. So I do the first P, and then I go into what I call a truth or fiction bell ringer, usually in the next day or two. And again, this uses HyperDocs as well, and this link will be there. Now, this is the first truth or fiction bell ringer that I use, but these change frequently. So first of all, we say, okay, I can trust some people I know, so I can trust everything that they post. Is this true? And they, think, pair, share, they discuss it. Is that true? Why or why not? And I actually have an example of something that was posted, and you probably still see posted on Facebook. So when I'm doing this, I take whatever is currently traveling. It could be on Facebook, it could be on Snapchat, it could be on Instagram. I mean, it could be on wherever. And so I ask them, I say, your aunt posted this item on Facebook. Should you repost it? If not, what should you say to your aunt? And how do you find out? And could you search something? And then eventually I'll tell them, can Snopes help you? So I'm sharing this, we talk about it, and they do their research. Now, this particular lesson, I usually give them 5 minutes to find out the answer, but every time I do follow-up bell ringers, I'll actually like to go faster and faster each time, so they have some kind of sense of pressure of learning to answer these faster and faster. So we talk about what they recommended and what they can learn from this. And then we discuss what is a hoax. Now here I have 2 other articles that are kind of, mentoring them. What is a hoax? Now they're going to want this because they're going to know that a game is coming up. And then we're also going to talk about this real important question of why do you think some people create hoaxes? For example, a lot of people create hoaxes because they're trying to get your private information. They're trying to get information from you about you, and people used to not think it was such a big deal, these surveys and such, but with the Cambridge Analytica now we're finding out that that data can be used to do things. So and then you want to reflect, how would you feel if you reposted and found out it was a lie? Now this is really important because here's the thing, people often share incorrect information. But if you go and message everybody on Facebook not to friend somebody, and then you find out it's a hoax, and you don't go message them back, you are sending everybody a message that if I find out I'm wrong, I'm never going to tell you. And the people that I trust are the people who mess up and fess up, not the people who mess up and try to hide it from everybody. So I want a transparent person. So when I mess up, I will fess up. I will go back and I will tell people that I have messed up. And I talk to the kids about what should you do if you accidentally send out false information over email? What should you do if you send out false information on Facebook, and how should you correct it? Deleting the post is not necessarily a great way to do it. Editing the post is probably better, and putting it at the top. This is not correct information. I'm going to leave it down below to show you that it is a hoax, but it is not correct information. So we talk about what we need to do if we share incorrect information and what others should do. And so this is what we talk about, what we should do when we realize we've made a mistake. And then Use the template below and make a copy and add your own challenge and create a truth or fiction bell ringer. So I have the kids create their own. Now this leads into the truth or fiction bell ringer game. So after I have thrown at least one truth or fiction and tried to trick them, then we do the truth or fiction bell ringer game. And I will split into, however many teams, 4 or 5 teams. And each team has to turn in 5 news articles. And these should look like they are printed out from the web. Now, 2 must be true and 3 must be false. And the kids will find all kinds of things. There's even fake news generators, things that you can type news into that will look like it's on a major site. There's all kinds of tools they can use to fake news. Now, you could say, well, Vicki, why would you actually teach kids that they can fake news? Well, I want them to understand the tricks of the hoaxers, and they're trying to trick each other. So after they turn those in, the teams actually will put it all in a Google slide and share it with me, and they'll go through and present the news articles to each other. They have 3 minutes to make up their minds as to whether it's truth or fiction, and then they all vote on a private piece of paper, and then they hold up their votes, and teams get 1 point for each time they trick the other team and 1 point for each time they guess the other team's true or false answer correctly. This is a fantastic game. I can't tell you how much fun it is, but also how it really helps the kids change and be more discerning and understand the things that people are doing to falsify information, because there is truth and there is fiction, and that's what I like to do with them. And then throughout the year, after we do that, I will continually do truth or fiction bell ringers. And they know when they come in and they have a truth or fiction that they have a very short amount of time to see what's true and what's false. And I'm kind of developing that discernment muscle. I want them within 2 to 3 minutes to be able to just know if something's true or false very, very rapidly, and understand what scams are and that sort of thing. And it's really the kind of thing that you have to continually take a look at. So the truth or fiction is awesome. Well, you can say, okay, well, what about these 9 key P's here? Well, after we do the truth or fiction and we've done the passwords and that sort of thing, then I kind of think that kids are ready to go into the aspects of digital citizenship here. So I like to do it with a jigsaw, and I'll take the 8 P's that are left, since I've already pretty thoroughly taught passwords. And we'll use this, and we'll do it also using HyperDocs, but I typically have them make a video. So I can't use Office Mix anymore since that's going away, but each of these areas. So I want them to describe their topic. I want them to talk about how knowledge in this area will keep you protected online. I want an example of a person who did not know how to stay safe about this area and what happened to them. And then I want specific recommendations about what students need to know to keep themselves safe in this area. And all my students have a YouTube channel, so I have them create a video with Office Mix, and they'll embed it on the class website. They'll also include this in their own website or personal portfolio as well, teaching about digital citizenship. So how do I go in and help the kids understand these topics without telling them everything? Well, the way I do it is after I give them these 4 points, I like to ask good questions. So I have these just simple handouts that I give them, or I have them in a HyperDoc now that you can go to. And this is the first one. This is for privacy. So I'm asking these questions, and the questions help the kids figure out the answer. So not giving them answers here. I'm letting them look at that. And I'm just going to mention a few little highlights here. So do students understand how to protect their private information? And do they know what private information is? So then kids have to look up and, okay, what is private information? I've given them some examples. Do they also understand how websites track their web usage habits and how to control their privacy settings? So this takes them down a whole different path, and they start saying, okay, well, what are the privacy settings on Snapchat, and how are they tracking me? And I was just listening to a podcast on this the other day, and it looks like that the way they're going to be marketing in Snapchat is with recognition of items in the snaps. So if they see that you are getting your toenails done, then they might start giving you ads for toenail polish or something of that nature. So somehow it's not just facial recognition, it's like object recognition that they're going to recognize. So we may go down a trail of Snapchat privacy, or we may go down a trail of Facebook privacy. But here's the thing, because the students are creating it, every school is different. They are investigating the privacy settings for the popular networks for your school. Okay, so if my school would not be the same as yours and everybody else's. So that's why this is so important, because kids are actually investigating and then creating recommendations for the privacy settings for their own social media that they're using. Okay, and then we've got personal information. And I do always call these out, because when you call them out and you say, you have private information, you have personal information, well, the first question is, well, what's the difference between private information and personal information? So the kids then have to look it up. And then do they know why they should be selective about sharing information with others, and what is oversharing, and can it be a problem? Well, here, remember, they're trying to find examples of people who have overshared and how sharing personal information can be a problem. So an example would be a young girl who took a picture behind her new car with her car tag in it and her street sign in it and a picture of her house. Okay, and that was way too much personal information, and it was not a good situation for her in her circumstances, because she just gave out a whole lot of personal information that she probably did not want posted. And believe it or not, a lot of times kids will say their parents are some of the worst about giving out personal information. My child is going to go get their driver's test today at such and such. And sometimes kids aren't very comfortable with people knowing all that. So do think about how you model that yourself when you're a parent. And then number 4 is photography. And the students understand geotagging, and geotagging is really important. I mean, a young girl takes a picture of the new paint in her room and says, I love the new yellow paint on my walls, and, uploads it to wherever. And most photos now have geotagging turned on. So you can see exactly where that was taken. So I can see a cute little pin on the map where some 9-year-old child who probably shouldn't be on social media is uploading a photograph tagged with their latitude and longitude of their bedroom. And, that's just not smart. So there are times that I turn off geotagging on my photos and times I turn it on, and kids need to know how to do that. And do they understand how geotagging can cause privacy concerns? And that's important too. Of course, there are some good aspects of geotagging and some good things that can happen. But there are also some challenging things that can happen as well. So we talk about photography, and there's all other issues with photography and in the content of photos, and you could change your questions and go that direction as well. Then you've got property. Now this is actually the student's property that we're trying to get at, because the next one, number 6, is permissions, and we're trying to get permissions. So in this case, do students understand copyright and know how to generate a license for their own work? And do they respect the intellectual property rights of those who create work? So for example, students have to know the difference between, Creative Commons, share alike, non-commercial, and it allows derivatives. And so they've taken that, and then when they do their license, they can't say all rights reserved, because it's share alike. That means it has to be shared the way the original license was. So in this case, they are doing their property of their own property. So the kids will create a video here when they're studying this for the 9 key Ps about how students are going to create licenses and how to understand it, and it's kind of pretty complex. Now then they also have to get permission. Do students know how to get permission for work they use? And do they know how to cite permissions in the work that they use? So recently I taught my kids how to podcast, and the music that they used had to be pod safe music, and they had to cite it at the end. And they just didn't understand, well, music is music. And I know you have people that get royalties or that deserve credit for their work. And you really have to teach that and help them understand that throughout the year, but you definitely want to introduce it at the beginning. And then you've got protection. Do students understand what viruses, malware, phishing, ransomware, and identity theft are, and how these things work? And also how to research the emails and assertions to see if they're a hoax or meant to harm them. Now, this is number 7, the one I'm going to be working on this summer, because I think that kids need to understand how to protect themselves from what I call, for lack of a better word, the danger of getting diva syndrome. And I think that especially young girls spend so much time comparing themselves to others, um, and actually they found that people who are heavy users of social media can have a much lower self-esteem. So I think part of protecting yourself is knowing when to disconnect, limiting screen time. There is a new book that just came out that Ann Collier wrote about on Net Family News on April 30th, called The Art of Screen Time, by Anya Kamenetz, spelled Kamenetz, from NPR. And I'm going to be taking a look at that and trying to understand that. The other thing that I like is the metaphor in the book, The Art of Screen Time. It says that some kids are dandelions and some kids are orchids, that a lot of kids are just dandelions. They're resilient. They can kind of blow this way and that way, and they'll be fine, and they'll prosper, and they'll grow. And they're hardy and resilient, and they can thrive anywhere. But that some children are orchids, and they're highly sensitive um, to things that happen, and they have a much greater than normal sensitivity. And I think it's important to realize when you're talking digital citizenship that it's not one size fits all, that a lot of the kids are those dandelions, and they're pretty resilient and they can handle things, but the orchids um, are very, very sensitive, and they need to know that about themselves. They need to understand their own vulnerabilities, and I think adults need to understand that everybody is not taking a vacation today, and everybody's not at Disney, and everybody is not having the happiest moment of their life. That's what people post on Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat. They post those happy moments, and most people are editing. We're seeing an edited version of people's lives. They're only taking pictures from their good side. They're only taking pictures when they have all their makeup on and not when they look terrible, for most of them. And we've got to protect ourselves. So this particular one is one that I'm going to be revising this summer, because I think that we have to learn about self-protection and self-care as it relates to social media. And this is something that us adults need to learn about too. And then we've got professionalism. And, I tell my students first day, you are professional students. This is your job. Your job is to be a student. And they need to understand the professionalism of academics versus their social lives. And I'm going to tell you, if more of us K-12 teachers would learn this, the college professors would thank us. Because when kids get online in online spaces, they think that they can write in IM speak, instant message speak. They will do lowercase i's. They will do the letter C for SEE. They will do the letter U for YOU. They have to know that they have to spell and use punctuation correctly, and use correct netiquette. Don't type in all caps, and online grammar. And, I like to get my students to use Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid and other tools to help them spell things correctly. I got permission from my curriculum director several years ago that I won't even grade it if they haven't spell checked it. I give it back to them, and I say, you know what? I am a terrible human spell checker, and I am. I took a U Science testing that shows that after about 10 minutes of grading, I really fatigue on catching commas and spelling and such. So I always have to run it through my Grammarly anyway. So I won't even grade it if they haven't spell checked it, because that's just the bare minimum. I mean, if they're asking an English teacher to be their spelling and grammar checker, that is just the height of laziness in today's modern world. So I'd really stress the professionalism of being a student and take care of your business. Do they also know how to properly cite things and also forward email and converse professionally with others? So I do like to have email going back and forth with my students. Do they know how to attach? Do they know how to forward things? Do they know the difference between blind copy and carbon copy and all of that? So we do want them to be professionals. You can't believe how many kids don't know how to email their professor professionally by the time they get to college. So we need them to understand how to be a professional, and how to treat others with respect. Even if it's using the titles, it's Dr. So-and-so. You don't just call somebody by their first name unless they tell you. So professionalism is a really big one, you can tell, that I spend a lot of time on with my students. And then we've got permanence. Students don't have digital footprints, they have a digital tattoo, and it's almost impossible to erase it. We want students to also think about their voice and how they want to be perceived online. We want them to know that what backups are, and that very few sites are private. The examples that people turn up in this are usually just tremendous and enough to get kids to really change their behavior. Now, this I just want to stress again, the importance of having the students do this research and talk about these examples, because if it is coming from you, they're going to ignore it. Hold on, I'm going to take some water. Do remember that you can type in your questions in just a second. Thank you for your patience. I've been teaching all day. Okay, so again, the effective digital, the jigsaw explanation defines the topic. It gives an example from real life, gives recommendations that could have prevented the problem in the real life example, and then gives specific recommendations for people to stay safe in this area from what they have learned. And that's what I want my students to do. And they create the videos and we screen the videos. You don't have to do videos. You could do, you could do presentations. You can do it all sorts of ways. Now, this is an example of the copyright infringement. The person who created this campaign poster for Barack Obama in this particular example my students turned up did not have permission from the Associated Press to use the photograph, but it was used on the photo and used very broadly. And they talked about, what happened and the consequences for it. And then they also used a couple of other examples that may relate more to students. But a lot of kids, they just don't have a clue that people own photographs and people own music. And it's important. And you can see the video that the kid created, and they turned it in on the learning management system, which we use, PowerSchool Learning, which actually has wikis built in. So this is sort of their wikis, and they're sharing it. And you can see all the different pages in there, and that the kids were able to click on and share all this information and look at everybody else's pages as they were investigating things. Okay, so now we're number 4. We have to teach kids procedures for when they have problems. And I can't tell you how big this is. Now, I do have a free internet safety poster that NetRef is posting on the notes for this webinar. So you can download it and use it for free. It's called the 5 Steps to Internet Safety. And this is really important because, I've heard people say, stop, block, and tell. Okay, and I know that it's nice to have 3 steps, but here's the problem. You definitely want to stop what you're doing if you're having a problem. If you're being cyberbullied, if somebody's harassing you, you want to stop. But you do not want to block until you screenshot. And I know that this is intuitive, but I cannot tell you how many issues that I have seen with teachers talking to me, at ISTE or other places, and they say, you know what, the kids stopped and they blocked everybody, but they lost all the evidence and it had been going on for months. And so when they went to the principal or their parents went to the principal, they had no proof at all because they blocked. So you have to teach kids how to take a screenshot. If they have a Chromebook, they have got to know how to take a screenshot on their Chromebook. If they have got a phone, they've got to know how to take a screenshot. And then they've got to know how to send those screenshots to the appropriate adult that needs to take a look at that. So we stop and then we screenshot. Then we block. Okay, so we have all the screenshots and the proof, and then we block. Then we tell somebody who can help us with the problem. And then after we get the problem resolved, we share what happened, if it is appropriate, and how people can learn from it. So I know that we had a restaurant. I followed this model. There was a restaurant down the road from me that used to be open. They're not open anymore, but a child went down there and posted a YouTube video and went all through the restaurant, and they were just insulting all about the restaurant and just really, and it was from a family that everybody knew, but the child had been visiting from Atlanta down to South Georgia. And some people complained about it, and the child ended up getting called at their school, and their school had them take the YouTube video down. And all the families got involved and all that sort of thing. Well, when it happened, I actually talked to my students about the consequences that, yeah, you can go and insult a restaurant all this distance away, but it had become a school issue for several reasons, and it was not a good thing for the child. So we do want to share and talk about current things that happen. And, I talk about the issues. I'll talk to them about the phone call I got from Visa that was not really from Visa today. So the other thing is we want to be really careful about fear. I don't like teaching with fear because I don't think it's permanent, and I don't think that kids believe fear anymore. It's like the parent or the teacher who cried wolf. I think educators have cried wolf, and then when kids see there's no wolf, they don't believe us when there really is a wolf, and it's our fault. We should know better. We tell them that story in first grade, and we don't believe it, I think. So false evidence appearing real is often what drives fear, and it drives fear with educators. It drives fear with others. So we've all got to become better digital citizens. So let's take a moment to review what we've talked about. So first of all, I like to introduce a sample topic in a way that teaches. So I gave you that example at the beginning with passwords. So I take you through that sample topic. And again, I like to use hyperdocs. And in the landing page that you're going to get, the email that you're going to get tomorrow, it's going to include all the hyperdocs, including the ones I've shared with you today. And then you want to build. So you want to give booster knowledge. Almost think like you're immunizing. You're giving a dead version of the virus so that they will be immune to the live version of the virus. Well, you're giving a piece of information that can't harm them. And you're asking the kids to learn how to discern if it's truth or fiction. I don't use the word fake because fake news has become a politicized term. So I like to use truth or fiction. Fiction means somebody made it up. It is news, but somebody made it up. And then we engage kids. So we let them develop their own truth or fiction bell ringers and try to trick each other. So then they're learning all the tricks of the trade. Not so they can deceive people, but so they can not be deceived themselves. And we make it into a game. And then I try to trick them all year long. So I'm always pulling stuff in. I like to take things that there's no way that's true, but then it is, or things that sound really, really true, but they're false, and to see if they would fall for the scam that was over the weekend or whatever. And there's always things going through Facebook, people falling for things. And then we take a deep dive. So the Jigsaw project's on the remaining 8 aspects of digital citizenship, and they teach and educate each other. And again, this is coming from them, and they are the leaders. And it's not you promoting fear, false evidence appealing real, and trying to scare them, because they tune us out after just 2 or 3 minutes, it seems. At least they do me. And then we try to protect kids. So we teach kids the procedure for handling problems in their personal life. And wow, I went kind of fast there, Emily. Let's talk for a minute, and then we're going to go to our Q&A. Back to you, Emily.
Yeah. No problem. Yes, you covered a lot of information quickly, but as Vicki said, we are going to send you an email tomorrow that's going to have a link to all of these great resources and all of the downloadables and the documents. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll let Vicki get a little more water and rest her voice a little bit while we thank our sponsor again, NetRef. We also want to share with you a very special offer from NetRef that we are giving everyone who attended today's webinar the opportunity to pilot NetRef. So try it at no cost, and you can find out more about this offer at the URL on your screen. And the great thing about NetRef is it is one of the many tools you can use to help teach digital citizenship, as well as keep your students safe, on track, and on target when they're using digital resources in the classroom. It's a simple to use application that provides every teacher with the ability to choose which websites and apps their whole class or individual students can access at different points in the day. Teachers can also see what websites or apps students are using at any given time, so you can see if that student's on ESPN instead of, a learning application, and you can block that ESPN from little Johnny. But if Susie's not using ESPN, then you don't need to block it from Susie. NetRef also enables administrators to monitor website and app usage at both the class and the school level. And this is great information that demonstrates how technology tools integrate into the school day and which resources are being used most. So you can really see how those investments are paying off in learning gains and where some additional professional development might be needed. So again, you've got the opportunity to pilot NetRef at no cost. So check out that URL. We'll also include that in the email that you'll receive tomorrow. And we hope that you'll get in touch with NetRef. We appreciate them sponsoring Vicki today, and we very much appreciate all the information that Vicki has shared. So we do have a couple questions that have come in, and we certainly have time to take more. So if folks want to send them in, feel free. We'll go ahead and get started with the ones that we've got, Vicki. The first is, how do you involve parents in teaching digital citizenship? That's obviously a key component, and we want to make sure these messages are being reinforced at home.
Well, so I use a tool called Blooms to share things privately with parents, and so I like to share, videos with parents. But honestly, a lot of the kids will go home and talk to their parents about what they've learned, their topics of information. But it's a constant challenge to help educate parents because, I don't know if any of you guys are like me, but you'll have a PTO session to try to teach parents about digital citizenship, and they just don't seem to show up unless there's some big crisis that's just happened related to it. I like to share stuff privately with them in our Blooms group, and Blooms is a lot like Remind. So I'll share the videos, I'll show their conversations. Now, if there is an issue going on, we had an issue a while back with some location sharing going on with kids. I'll actually take some screenshots and share that with the whole school and try to educate them. So there have been 3 or 4 times I sort of send a news flash to all the parents that there is a pressing security issue with this or that. When Yik Yak was popular, I did some research and then wrote up an opinion piece about what I thought about Yik Yak and how the parents should probably look at it and take a look at it on their phones. So there's lots of opportunities you have to talk to parents and having, um, you've got to relate before you educate. So you've got to have a great relationship with your students, but then also a great relationship with the parents because you're partners in educating that child, and you've got to have that open line of communication with the parents. So those are some of the ways that I communicate with parents. But the parents will also email me. We have an open line of communication. They'll say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" or "What do you think about that?" And if it's a big deal, then I'll go and turn around and share that with all the parents. After I write it up and make sure that there's no private information being given out or that people don't know, who we're talking about or that sort of thing. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, like you said, the students are going to probably talk to their parents about it, but it'd be fun to kind of give them a challenge to ask their parents, like your example, Vicki, have you gotten a scam phone call, or have you seen something that wasn't real or you thought was real but learned later it wasn't on Facebook? Get the parent kind of in on that hunt as well. Not all
Yeah, and when
parents
they're
would do
doing the
that, but
truth
some
or
would.
yeah, when you're doing the truth or fiction bell ringers, they will go home and try to get that because they want to trick their friends.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. um, so, how long do you expand this unit? Is it something that you put into a 3-week thing, or is it something you do all year long?
Okay, so the first one is probably 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how fast they move, the one on the passwords. The truth or fiction bell ringers, typically those are 10 minutes or less. The truth or fiction game is actually a 2 to 3 day assignment. I give them typically 2 days to create it and then 1 day to play the game. The game can run over if they really get into it or they do extras. The jigsaw is, if they know how to make film, I can do it pretty quickly. But if they don't know how to make film and I have to teach them how to make film, that could be a 7 day assignment, 7 class day assignment typically, and I have 50-minute periods. If they already know how to make film, then it's more like a 3 to 4 day assignment. And then we like to have screening parties. So anytime we make a movie, since I like to make movies in my class, we like to have screening parties and they'll bring in food and we'll sit there and watch the movies and discuss them. Because, popcorn conversations are kind of conversations where you can get the kids to relax and really learn a lot. So, that's and then the truth or fiction bell ringers, you can do that throughout the year. So those typically are 8 to 10 minutes. I don't like my bell ringers to be any longer than that, and I want them to make quick decisions. But if you choose to do truth or fiction bell ringer again, and I have done it like a second time because the kids really do love it, then usually they'll be able to create all of their truth or fiction news articles in a day because they've learned all the tricks. And then you'll be able to play it the next day. So that becomes a good 2 day assignment when you repeat it. So I hope that's kind of helped everybody. And again, I have about 50-minute periods. So that's how long it takes me. But it just depends on the project that you have the students do for these activities.
Yeah, I think that was definitely helpful guidance. I also just want to let folks know that earlier the NetRef site was down, but that link, that URL for the pilot does appear to be working now. There was an issue, but looks like we're back up and running. So sorry about that little technical glitch. Okay, so our next question, what age or grade do you start teaching this content to?
Okay, so I had Ann Oro on my podcast, and she talked about digital citizenship, or actually she may be airing next week. I can't remember if it's already up or next week, but she talked about how in their district they had gone through and pretty much said, okay, this is what we want each student in each age to know. Now, I like to use the questions because the kids kind of make it age appropriate for what they know. You don't know what they know. So I like using questions because they're going to kind of come out with what they know and tell you versus if you guide them too much. So it would be, it's age appropriate. Now, I think every single age needs to understand stop, block, screen share, stop, block, uh, I'm sorry, stop, screenshot, block, tell, and share. And every age that has a device needs to know how to do that, whether they're on iPad or Chromebook or whatever they're doing. So everybody needs to know how to do that. And then you have to make it age appropriate for what you have. So the younger kids, if they're in Google Docs, you'll want to talk about collaboration and working together. And you may use different terminologies for some of these, but you definitely have age appropriate learning, and there's lots of resources out there to help you determine what's appropriate. I do think that every school district and every school should really go through by grade level and say, this is what we want our kids to know and understand about digital citizenship. And here's our philosophies on digital citizenship and how we're going to communicate with parents and educate it. And so we can kind of come up with some norms of behavior, a community of practice, really, among our students and our teachers. Because here's the thing, our teachers have community of practice, but we've really kind of ignored developing the community of practice among our students. And now our students have community of practice, which is really an exciting thing for us. But community of practice has to be discussed, and you have to develop norms of behavior. So any age that is using technology to collaborate and create, you've got to bring digital citizenship into that age because it's necessary because they're using the tools.
Yeah, and I think like with everything, starting young and teaching them at appropriate levels is going to prevent issues down the road. Letting them know that responsibility up front. So this is an opinion type question. Do you think it's all right for teachers to stalk their students online? And is it all right to come and present what students stalk is probably a strong word. She put it in quotations. And is it all right to come and present what students have written on social media about their school or their teachers in a staff meeting?
Phew. Oh, I think you're kind of getting in a tough area. Okay, so first of all, I have lots of alerts set up on social media to alert me anytime our school is spoken about in social media in a public space, right? YouTube videos or whatever. And as a person who's monitoring that, it's my responsibility to let the principal know what's going on. My honest opinion is that this person is kind of asking for trouble, and that may not be the best way to handle those issues. If you have kids talking poorly about it, so if I've seen kids who've said something negative about a teacher before, and in my approach is always, okay, I have a copy of it, and see, my kids know also that they can take a screenshot of anything, and they don't have to put their name on it and put it on my chair at any time, and then I will look into it. Whatever it is, I can do that, and they've done that sometimes. But if I know that a student's talking poorly about a teacher, I will typically, if I have a copy of it, I'll have my screenshot, and I will go talk privately to the student and say, okay, is this how you want to be perceived by the teacher? If you're trying to change behavior in the students, how are you going to do that by outing them in front of their teachers? And how are you going to educate that student? How are you going to help that student learn from their behavior? Or are you just going to cause dissension and strife? So I think that we have to model things. Yes, it's disconcerting when kids talk bad about teachers. It's disconcerting when teachers talk bad about students. but there is a professional way to handle things, and that I don't friend my students unless they friend me first. If somebody brings me an issue, and they do, then I will always address it, but I will typically always address it with the child, unless it was like a child who was thinking about self-harm or something like that. Then I would immediately go to the parent, of course. But I don't know. I guess, you got to relate before you educate. It's all about the relationship with those students. And I'm not a fan of that particular approach. And maybe there's a case of where that might work, but if I had an issue, I would take it straight to the principal. Now, I've actually had to deal with parents before. I've had parents who have spoken about their child in ways that I thought were not healthy for the child to be spoken about, and I had to talk to parents. And there are people who've talked about different sports in a way that was not appropriate, and then talk to them directly. But I prefer to handle things privately and try to help people learn and change behavior while not coming across as a know-it-all, because certainly I'm not anybody's judge, but I do want to help people live effectively and live an amazing life. And life is all about relationships. And we just have to learn to get along and behave like professionals. And I'm not crazy about the stalk the kids idea at all. At all, unless it was my job to like filter people out who were trying to apply to my college, and I wanted to get people who said nice things. But uh, that's not the approach. Maybe there's something I'm not aware of that people might do that, but you know, some schools may have codes of conduct that they want their kids to do, and may have somebody in charge of enforcing those codes of conduct. In that case, that may be different, but I still don't think you'd out them in a staff meeting. Whew, goodness.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes we forget that, like you said, social media is just another form of communication. I mean, it's the same as if we stumbled upon someone talking in the cafeteria. So we need to approach how we handle situations and conflicts on social media in the same way that we would in a live human to human situation. So
Yeah.
um, yeah. So, but that was a sticky question. We've got another little bit lighter one that's come in. You were talking earlier in the professionalism section about students, writing in that text shorthand that they want to do. Do you grade? Do you take points off on a grading scale, or is that just something you kind of try to coach the
I
students
refuse to
through?
grade it. If they don't spell check, I
Oh,
refuse to grade it. They get a 0 in the grade book, but I will let them completely make it up. They have a day to do their spell check and turn it back in. I refuse to grade. I refuse to be a human spell check. And I went to my curriculum director and asked for permission of that. That is just an absolute standard. You must spell check. I cannot stress that enough. It is complete and utter laziness if you have spell check available to you that you will not spell check, and you give it to another human being to spell check. Because truthfully, human beings fatigue. Most grammar is far better checked by technological device. So work ethic is very important when you're a professional student or a professional teacher. I will not grade it, but absolutely, you cannot make an A if you're going to have lowercase. And I mean, that is really a big issue for me, just because it's so easy to fix. All they have to do is change their behavior. And if all they have to do is change their behavior and do something that takes 5 minutes, if they won't do it, I am not being a good teacher by allowing them to even turn it in. So I refuse to grade it unless they're going to spell check. That's just completely unacceptable if they don't.
we're getting a lot of hears from the audience on that. So
Oh, good.
lots of people agreeing with that sentiment. Well, it looks like we've reached the end of our time and the end of our questions. So a very, very big thank you to Vicki for sharing all of this. And a thanks to all of you who took the time to join us today. Again, we know how busy this time of year is, so we are pleased that you took the time to be with us. And just one final reminder to keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow for a link to all of the handouts, the presentation deck, the recording, and also that link to the pilot that NetRef is offering. So we hope you'll take advantage of that. Thanks, everyone, and have a great evening, and good luck getting there to the end of the school year.
Thank you, everybody.